Hi there. After Dead Space's award-winning release, EA Redwood Shores would be rebranded as Visceral Games, a team specializing in genre titles. Basically, dark, gory, edgy video games made just for adults like myself. Dead Space 1 creators Glenn Schofield and Michael Condrey wouldn't return to make this even more ambitious sequel, instead, going off and founding Sledgehammer Games, another team that would go on to make so many Call of Duty games that I absolutely did not play. Dead Space 1's senior gameplay designer, Wright Bagwell, would be promoted to the director's chair for the game's sequel. By the way, I got some feedback on my Dead Space 1 video about Glenn Schofield not being the actual director of Dead Space 1. This might sound funny, but I actually knew that while making that video. I will admit to being a little confused because while websites, video game articles, and even the game's credits list him as the executive producer, the man himself has said in recent interviews that he was the creator and director of the game.
I'm Glenn Schofield, creator and director of Dead Space.
Executive producer can mean a lot of things in game development. Could be the guy that handles the money, makes sure all the creative decisions get cleared with the higher-ups, or could just be the second director or even creative director. Whatever the case may be, Schofield seems to have a lot of information and knowledge about very small things that took place during that game's development. So I think it's safe to say that he and Michael Condrey were the creators of the Rancid Moon / Dead Space idea. I just thought I'd clear that up because there was a lot of discourse around the Callisto Protocol's release, trying to discredit Glenn Schofield for making Dead Space 1, and it's like, you can have an L and also one of the biggest W's of all time. It's not impossible. I swear. Y'all just be saying anything. That said, every video game is in fact a collaborative effort, and yeah, a lot of Redwood Shores would make the transition to Visceral Games and Dead Space 2. Wright Bagwell, being one of the key decision makers for the first title's gameplay, was a great pick to head that project's sequel. Ian Millam, series art director, would come back to Dead Space 2 to make sure the game had a consistent look and feel, along with Ben Wannett, who was responsible for making most of the concept art for Game 1 and 2. Jason Graves, composer of the entire Dead Space series, would also return with some classically Dead Space-feeling tracks, as well as some new ones that are also magnificent. Anthony Johnston, one of the writers of the first game and all of the side games like Extraction, Mobile, and Ignition, has jokingly said he was hustled out of writing Dead Space 2 by known TV writer Jeremy Bernstein, who apparently got the job after chatting up some Dead Space 1 devs at GDC. Jeremy Bernstein would be accompanied by other staffers that contributed to Game 1's story, like Chuck Beaver. All of the right people who helped bring the world of Dead Space 1 to life, paired with a bunch of new programmers and artists, would come together to do the impossible: make a sequel to Dead Space. The climb for Visceral Games would be a challenging one. DS2 had a lot of ambitious goals it wanted to achieve in its own right, like taking iconic silent protagonist Isaac Clarke and giving him a voice. If you were around during this game's hype cycle, you'll probably remember this in particular being quite the hot topic. Taking this character we had been living with for nearly 3 years and making him speak? Wait a minute, I thought he was supposed to be me. Isaac already is a character. Didn't you read his objective logs? Fake fan. Yeah, there was a lot of toxicity over a change that would ultimately be the right one. We'll talk about it later. Another change that went hand in hand with making Isaac more of a character were reports of the increased emphasis of heavy action and combat encounters. This change would hopefully show Isaac having a more confident and badass personality. Again, I was a little worried about this. At the time, RE5 had released during Dead Space 2's hype cycle. Myself and many other Resident Evil fans were definitely burnt by RE5's focus on co-op action over survival horror mechanics. For the amount of reports of changes to Dead Space's core gameplay, there were an equal amount of reports of confidence just coming from the dev team. You could tell that they were really proud of the game that they were making. Speaking of the hype cycle, I remember Dead Space 2's being insane. Like I mentioned before, we actually got other games that took place in between Dead Space 1 and 2 that all helped fill out the world leading up to the game's sequel. I personally think all of them are pretty great, and I may have replayed each of them for this video. Did I need to do that? Not at all. But they might have some narrative significance to Dead Space 2. EA was going off with tons of behind-the-scenes videos talking about the game's development. We would even get a series interviewing the man that would give life to Isaac. The legend, Gunnar Wright. In retrospect, this was a genius move. It got fans to relate with the actor going into the game, making the voice inclusion a lot less jarring. There was also another video series called Your Mom Hates Dead Space 2, where EA scared mothers all across the country with the horrors of this game. All I could think about while watching these videos was, my mom actually likes Dead Space. People who make video game marketing campaigns are completely insane. But hey, it worked out in the end. I played the game at release, watched the 2 animated movies that accompanied it, and played all those side games I mentioned earlier. I was a crazy Dead Space fan and was totally living for Dead Space 2's marketing cycle. But yes, dev history and marketing aside, it's time we finally got into the horrifying continuation that was...
Isaac, are you there? Come in, Isaac. Oh, God. I'm so sorry, Isaac. Look at the time difference. I'll call you back later.
It's okay. How you doing?
Good.
Dead Space 2 takes place 3 years after the events of the Aegis 7 incident. A video call from Nicole Brennan, Isaac Clarke's lost girlfriend, begins to play. A very talkative Isaac answers the call. He seems like a nice guy, a very normal engineer. We hear Nicole thank Isaac for convincing her to work aboard the Ishimura. Isaac pushing her in her medical career and being genuinely supportive. They seem like a great couple. After watching this admittedly cute interaction, Isaac awakens from his daze. He's been held in a mental hospital aboard The Sprawl, a city built into a fragment of the destroyed moon, Titan. This moon being the very first site of a planet crack. Isaac, suffering from vivid hallucinations of his departed girlfriend, is being interrogated by Titan medical staff, demanding he tell them more about the marker found on Aegis 7. Isaac is unable to respond coherently as he slips back into delusion. Like we saw at the end of Game 1, this memory of Nicole, now fully transformed into a sinister ghoul, haunts the poor engineer's mind. Passing out, Isaac is startled awake some time later. A man named Franco Delisle, the protagonist of Dead Space Ignition, is an engineer stationed in this city. He's also a member of the Unitology Church. More on them later. As Franco brings Isaac to his senses, we hear a woman named Dana Le Guin ordering Franco to get Isaac to safety. Well, I guess we don't have to worry about him anymore. Actually getting to see a human necromorph transformation right in our faces was something I never expected to see, but is a visual that has stayed with me ever since I saw it. Genuine body horror perfection, so effortlessly carrying the horrifying energy of 1982's The Thing. This opening chase sees Isaac running through hell as necromorphs flood into this mental hospital, slaughtering every remaining human that isn't running. Escaping within an inch of his life, Isaac makes it out of the mental ward. Exploring this dark and recently evacuated hospital proper, with its very realistic set dressing and insanely detailed environmental storytelling, kind of set my mind at ease when I originally played this game. I was happy to see that Visceral Games didn't cut any corners for going God mode with designing their levels visually. This opening chapter perfectly eases you into Titan Station, with its masterclass atmosphere introducing you to a type of environment not ever seen on the Ishimura. After exploring the various rooms, running into our interrogator, and taking out a few necros, Isaac finds a flashlight, kinesis module, and plasma cutter. Combining all of this together aids in our escape, but we're still very vulnerable without armor. Isaac encounters another patient on the run here, a man named Nolan Strauss. Strauss actually knows Isaac pretty well. Before we can talk to him, he books it out of the building, triggering a quarantine lockdown, alerting a horde of necros to our location. Fighting off the horde, we get another call from this Dana person. Right before she can tell us why this outbreak is happening, the call cuts out. Closing in on the hospital's exit, we find our old engineer power armor. Looking sharp, Mr. Fixer. Exiting the hospital, Isaac's cornered by a massive necromorph, a new creature known as the Tripod. This mass of corpses is basically being piloted around by a master control necromorph, parasitically puppeting around the pile of flesh, disturbing and equally deadly. I really love how this game opens up with a boss fight like this, illustrating to us that Dead Space 2 isn't pulling any punches. You need to fight to survive on the Sprawl. After surviving the creature, Dana manages to reconnect with Isaac, finally filling him in on what's going on. The Unitology Church, more specifically the director of this station, a man named Hans Tideman, is searching for Isaac. Tideman originally found Isaac unconscious, floating adrift in the escape shuttle at the end of Game 1. He's been keeping the lowly engineer under strict surveillance in the mental hospital, studying Isaac's brain but also discovering a latent signal buried deep within his mind. This signal is spreading, growing stronger by the minute, effectively killing Isaac. Dana promises Isaac a cure if he can get to her in time. Leaving the hospital behind and heading into the Sprawl, Isaac's goals are to find Dana, track down Strauss, and learn more about this elusive Tideman. The stakes are incredibly high as we officially begin our descent into madness. Pause right there. Can I just say, I love how the first Dead Space starts with the most unintimidating intro ever. Isaac and his pals are going to fix the ship, and hey, maybe I can say hi to my wife. Uh-oh, monster attack. I think I stubbed my toe on the way into the elevator. Ew, gross. I have to chop off their limbs? In Dead Space 2, Isaac's running for his life out of his absolute mind as poor mental patients get annihilated. His girlfriend is now permanently a mind goblin, making fun of him as he tries to survive. A man slits his throat after giving you a flashlight, and then a twisted, contorted flesh demon the size of a bus tries smashing you to pieces. It's actually insane. So for now, we're going to examine Dead Space 2's new gameplay. We'll return to Isaac's story later. So yeah, let's dive knee-deep into the dead. Isaac's control feel has been greatly updated from how he felt in the first game. In my video on Dead Space 1, I spent a good amount of time describing the heavy subtleties in Isaac's movement and melee. I felt like the devs wanted the player to feel like they were inhabiting Isaac's power armor. Movement was intentionally sluggish, and melee was an act of using all of Isaac's physical strength to simply punch at a monster. In DS2, Isaac moves a lot faster to accommodate the overall gameplay shift to heavier action. No longer is the subtle sluggishness of the first title present, but Isaac still feels heavy, with each step, punch, and stomp feeling impactful. Isaac's melee attacks hit fast and hard. You can endlessly punch now, smashing necros to pieces. The same goes for the stomp. Out of plasma energy, go ahead and mash whatever unfortunate necromorphs happen to be crawling underneath your 100-pound boots. It's a change in the formula that makes you feel powerful against the insurmountable odds. Powerful, not invincible. Isaac is still very much a human being, and as you saw in the intro, he starts his story without a suit. You have to battle and run from the necromorphs in your PJs, leaving you extremely vulnerable. It only takes like one slash to go down in that intro. That idea of playing as a normal, everyday guy is still a focus the devs brought to the table, just in different but equally immersive ways. One thing that plays into that idea, and something that I love, is how the different suits are treated. Unlike the first game, you're not upgrading one engineer's suit with more armor pieces. You're actually finding a variety of power armor sets, the first being Isaac's original engineer gear. This one doesn't have any special abilities, kind of communicating to you that you're facing a much more challenging threat this time. You've got to leave that simple suit in the past. All of the following unlockable suits have a passive ability. The security guard armor has increased damage with the pulse rifle. There's an EMT medic armor that increases healing potency, and my favorite, the vintage suit, is a classically designed astronaut engineer set. This one gives you a store discount, and I don't know if that's supposed to be like symbolism for elderly vintage people getting discounts at like the grocery store or something, but let's go with that. Each of these suits is in fact another type of worker's garb. So Isaac, being an engineer, has to don these very normal occupational suits used in other trades to effectively survive. It's a really cool thematic tie that shows us how dystopian the Dead Space world is, where like most professions need power armor. One small detail I discovered while researching for this video is one of DS2's character and environmental artists, a woman by the name of Veronique Garcia. Garcia actually designed the characters in Final Fantasy Spirits Within, and I just can't help but notice how similar looking the power armor is in that movie to the security guard armor in this game. Yeah, I know. Mind-blowing. By the way, the suit-up animations might go a little too hard if you ask me. The Kinesis module, or TK is a lot more useful now, zapping items, objects, and necromorph blades immediately to Isaac's hand. In Dead Space 1, Kinesis was slow and needed its range upgraded. This time, TK upgrades are integrated into your suit. Instead of upping this thing's range, you increase the force at which items are thrown, making for a deadlier alternative to spending vital resources in battle. There are also a ton of spikes laying around the Sprawl for whatever reason. I'm not complaining, I love nailing these twisted bastards to a wall. It's just a little weird. Stasis has been reworked a bit, now featuring less uses at level 1. Like before, its duration and capacity can be increased, but now this powerful freeze ray recharges all on its own after a set amount of time. You heard that right. If you're out of replenishable stasis packs, the device will replenish itself. This chargeback can be upgraded, and much like Game 1, when maxed out, can get a little broken. With the amount of times you can freeze monsters and then manually refill this thing, you can really keep hordes under control in larger fights. Now that we're talking fights, let's talk weapons. So all of the first title's tools come back in this sequel. Everyone's favorite plasma cutter's back and can still be used to finish the entire game by itself. The pulse rifle makes its return and gets a serious buff out of the box. Unfortunately, the fuck everything button has been replaced with a simple grenade launcher. A much more practical and effective change, but I will miss that utterly ridiculous sprinkler of death. Other classics like the line and force guns, contact beam, and flamethrower are back and have all been upgraded. This time, every single returning gun gets enhanced firing and reload animations akin to something like Resident Evil 4. Good God, man. That's what I like to see. Aside from the returning weapons, Dead Space 2 also introduces 3 completely unique tools. The Seeker rifle is essentially a sniper rifle, allowing you to pick off necros at a distance. The detonator is basically the mine thrower from the Resident Evil series, letting you place explosive trip mines around the environment. Last but not least, there is the Javelin gun. It's kind of like a railroad spike tool. This thing, again, pins monsters to walls. I don't know why the gimmick of this title was nailing fleshy targets to walls. Again, I'm not complaining. These spears can also be electrically ignited, so impaling a target can potentially create a chain reaction, hitting other ghouls surrounding it. Like the first title, each and every weapon has an upgrade tree that require nodes. Since there are more weapons that you unlock at a pretty consistent rate, and way more mandatory combat scenarios, the game pretty much hands out nodes free of charge. In the first 30 minutes or so, I had like 5 nodes, which blew my mind coming off of Dead Space 1. What's really cool is now you can respec your nodes across every piece of equipment. This frees up a lot of headache in deciding which gear to prioritize on your journey. You no longer have to fully commit to select weapons. If you find a new one you're vibing with more, just downgrade something else and dump all of the power into that new piece of hardware. It's such a convenient addition to the series' combat formula. Another great addition are the new ghouls you'll be cutting apart. Much like the weapons, every single Dead Space 1 necromorph comes back for its sequel, plus 5 new creatures. Classics like slashers, leapers, infectors, pregos, lurkers, and dividers are still out to hunt you down. They all act very similarly to their Game 1 counterparts, with the exception of slashers projectile vomiting at you a bit more. The slashers, being the most common enemy type, have appropriate looks for the area you're exploring. A large variety of male and female slashers can be found, sporting broken power armor, street clothes, worker fits, and my favorite, Unitology church garb, which reminded me a lot of the Zealots from RE4. The Sprawl is basically a giant city, so seeing small details like this adds to the game's immersion and the God mode environmental design aesthetic Visceral Games always excelled at. The first new necro encountered is the Puker, a cue ball spitter with a nasty tendency for hurling its stomach acid at you. The pack are necromorph children that travel in large hordes. These little ungrateful runts rush you without hesitation. Pack members go down with single shots, making for some easy cannon fodder, but they'll also end Isaac fast if you're not quick on the draw. The force gun clears out these brats pretty handily. One of the most disturbing new enemies to this series is the Crawler. Baby horror is always a delicate subject to explore. Entering a young children's school and being met with necromorph babies that are essentially crawling landmines was not on the bingo card. I think their addition is great, but also truly terrifying. Whenever crawlers showed up, I could feel my vibe shift a little. They don't make a lot of appearances, but when they do, I got uncomfortable. Isaac, put the baby down, dude. God, for as uncomfortable as they make me feel, I do miss this brand of extreme edge in video games you rarely see nowadays. The coolest new enemy are the Stalkers, which are stealth necromorphs. They're often found in cramped storage areas and warehouses. These guys actually sneak around you, waiting for the perfect time to attack. They'll literally peek around corners to zero in on Isaac. They also won't attack right away. If your position is too defensive, they'll relocate to your flank or group up on you with fellow stalkers. They are one of the highlights of Dead Space 2, and every encounter I had with these silent creatures had me on the edge of my seat while also being fairly hyped. That detonator weapon I brought up before is great for dealing with stalkers. You can turn the tables on them by rigging a series of traps that they'll mistakenly walk into. It's always amazing setting up your mines and then hearing one of them go off behind you. You always feel like, yeah, gotcha, bitch. Having wild encounters with classic and new monsters always keeps the combat fresh. You never have fights with just one type of enemy, so you're always balancing how to take apart each threat while keeping yourself intact. It's just amazing how well thought out each of the normal battles are. Where the dismemberment magic kinda faded fast in the first game, you're not really thinking about that in DS2, since the hordes are so overwhelming. Quickly swapping weapons, arching your cutter's projector in the right angle, setting up mines, getting your railgun charged up, those are the things you're constantly thinking about. Dismemberment still plays a massive role in combat, but like I mentioned earlier, the pulse rifle is now just so good. Shooting for center mass on most difficulties will take down creatures. I feel like this can go against the game's core design and theme, but the silver lining is, the pulse rifle is optional. So yeah, play however you want. One complaint I have, and admittedly, it's a small one, is that no matter the difficulty, enemies will drop items like Halloween candy. Every single necromorph will give you a resource if you step on them or shoot their corpse. The only differentiating factor to drops is that you get less ammo and smaller heals on higher difficulties. It can look a little ridiculous seeing railgun ammo pop out of the corpse of a small child. I can't believe I just said those words out loud. It does make the game feel a bit arcadey, but I think if this frequent drop mechanic was removed, it would severely impact the pacing of combat. Since fighting is this game's focus, resources have to be doled out at a steady flow. Dead Space 2 isn't exactly a survival horror game, it's way more action horror like RE4. Unlike the first title, where lots of battles were optional, and the focus of your objectives was to get to a place and do repairs, here in DS2, your goals are often clear a room before you can progress. This type of scenario is present right at the start of the game, which in theory should be a massive problem for this Dead Space, right? The previous game, the one that started everything, is this grounded, slow-paced horror game where you have to manage your resources and you walk around like a tank. The counter to that is Dead Space 2 is so fucking good, I don't mind seeing monsters pop helpful resources out of their asses, rewarding me for being a goddess gamer. Combat is most of the game, yes, but everything else, presentation-wise from DS1, is still here. The horror, ambiance, and atmosphere are the cherry on top of this hyper-polished, multifaceted action horror romp. It's just so fun to play. Which, speaking of atmosphere and potential survival horror issues, let's talk about Dead Space 2's level design. So yeah, DS2 is 100% action horror. Every chapter is completely linear. Interconnected levels and the use of a map to get around are things of the past as you gun down, bash, and stomp ever forward to Isaac's goals. A lot of the levels are pretty much shooting galleries now, almost immediately telling you this is what you're in for when the first major battle takes place in a room you can't leave until you clear. I remembered being disappointed by this change back in the day. There are only a handful of encounters you can run from now. The thing that makes this heavier emphasis on action go down a lot smoother than some other linear games is that what you're doing in the minute-to-minute is just awesome. Dead Space 2 is a very cool action game. It's still got those themes of playing as an engineer using familiar tools as weapons, and even fixing things in the world itself in the form of puzzles. Survival horror is my favorite genre, but don't forget, I do love me a good action game from time to time. If a survival horror series makes an effortless transition to fun action, I can appreciate that just as much as a hardcore survival experience, which yeah, Dead Space 2's transition was effortless. Even though most of the game is now hallways that funnel you into battle arenas, the levels are still beautifully decorated like in the first game. Since you're exploring a city space station, the environments are much more varied than the Ishimura. Hospitals, apartment buildings, shopping centers, factories, train stations, and one of the standouts, the Unitology Church, all make you feel like you're going on this larger journey, despite the game actually being shorter. Even though you're gunning down everything, the overall aesthetic of Titan's Station almost begs you to slowly walk through it, taking in all of the meticulous detail that's gone into each and every room. Even though DS2 is heavy on its action encounters, you can see in my footage that I often just strolled through these levels. One of my favorites being the shopping mall you walk through before heading into the Unitology Church. It's such a well-designed area that tells a story in its smallest details. This was a normal place that normal everyday people would populate daily, relaxing and hanging out after work, now left in this creepy liminal state. The remnants of humanity are strewn about, but like the vacuum of space, it's lifeless. The horde-filled Unitology Church has a distinct futuristic medieval aesthetic throughout its halls and sermon rooms. I love the few back rooms and vent shafts you can explore that expose the human construction under this place's grandiose design. If the game was just shooting monsters, that'd be kinda lame, but it's areas like the ones I highlighted that present to you a fully realized world that's been destroyed. The game also constantly throws new scenarios at you that don't last too little or too long. How about sliding down a derailed train car, firing off at slashers as you go? Now you're hanging upside down, tangled in some cables, desperately keeping creatures away. Now you're slowly walking through the Unitology Church that looks like it came straight out of Dune or something. Oh, looks like a nightmare tentacle just dragged you through a series of walls. Now you're in outer space. No time to think, just shoot. It's a thrill a minute. It's really funny because in my Dead Space 1 video, I complained about the waypoint system being very hand-holdy and kinda useless. Dead Space 1 gave you a map with every room clearly labeled on it. In Dead Space 2, there isn't a map, but the waypoint system returns with added functionality. Now you can waypoint to shops, workbenches, and save points, which is really cool, but this game often locks you out of rooms, forcing you forward. There's literally no way or reason to backtrack a lot of the time. So if you make progress and you want to get back to a shop, well, you can't. The waypoint will just point you forward in the objective's direction. There's no point in using this thing, especially when DS1's phenomenal in-universe signage makes for the perfect amount of navigational assistance. I played this game 3 times for this video, and on my first replay, having not played this title for years, I was able to figure out where to go without any stress just by looking at the game itself. I used the waypoint feature maybe once to check out its new functions, so believe me when I say this, there is no reason to use this thing in this game. At best, there's one level that has a tiny amount of backtracking. The drop-dead gorgeous Unitology Church I've mentioned multiple times already. Even in this level, it's so easy to get around with how different all the rooms look. The Unitology Church is actually really cool because the more progress you make, the more doors you unlock that lead back to its main hall. From there, you can use the save room to restock and upgrade your stuff. It feels kinda survival horror. It's an at maximum 20-minute scenario that I wish got more playtime, but like I alluded to before, all of the linear gameplay is also fun. It's like another stop in the barrage of minute-to-minute level variety. So it's not a huge missed opportunity, it's more like a pace break between the high action. With that in mind, Dead Space 2 sure does have incredible pacing. There is a lot of fighting, but in between all of that, you still get moments of quiet time where things slow down. You'll do a simple puzzle, or explore a small side path finding resources. The biggest change introduced in DS2's level design is the new overhauled zero-G system. This time, instead of doing point jumps with mag boots, Isaac's suit now has a full zero-gravity navigation system. You actually float and control your movement through whatever space you're exploring. It can be a little disorienting at first, having to get used to movement in every possible direction, especially when you're being attacked. But after picking away at it for a few minutes, the free float system feels really good. Zero-G sections usually involve puzzles puzzles and outer space set pieces, much like the first game. This time, oxygen isn't as much of a thing you have to worry about outside of a handful of scenarios. One puzzle involves realigning solar plating in a massive outer space environment. It's awesome, flying between each solar panel, dodging necromorph projectiles, and restoring your oxygen at air stations. The revamped Zero-G is sick. There's another type of set piece that happens 3 separate times during the game: the Iron Man flight sequences. The first one sees Isaac getting used to this new system by flying to an out-of-the-way and out-of-control train car. These sequences are on rails and involve dodging incoming obstacles with the movement stick. I'm actually going to talk about the other 2 of these later. The final thing we have to talk about is something I know a lot of you have definitely forgotten about. Some of you straight up won't believe me when I tell you this, but Dead Space 2 actually had a competitive multiplayer. Back in the day on Xbox 360, Dead Space 2 had a second disc filled with the most 2011 needless but fun studio-mandated multiplayer game mode. What's truly unbelievable is the fact that I actually got Xbox Live matches in the year 2022 with people using voice chat.
Oh shit, we got extra people.
Yeah, XP for everybody.
You know? Whoa, give me that XP, I need a new gun, bitch. Alright, this would be a good time. Take your Advil, smoke your weed, do it now, get your coffee. You got 60 seconds.
It was so cool. It felt like I had gone back in time. One team plays as Titan security staff, the other play as a horde of Necros. It's super cool getting to control some of these iconic monsters in all of their twisted glory, shredding human targets like tissue paper. Since this is a multiplayer game, the human characters aren't as durable as Isaac, which makes taking out necromorphs extra satisfying, knowing that you're defeating an actual real person. There isn't a ton to talk about with DS2's multiplayer. It's got a progression system and light customization, but I just really wanted to bring it up to sort of preserve the memory of this title's odd and very of-the-time multiplayer mode. Dead Space 2 is one of those games where, as a reviewer, I kinda look past most of its problems with not being survival horror or having linear level design, because everything you do in it is just so cool. At its core, it's a fun action game that has some of the most badass and hype moments in any horror game. The game is so well-paced that you feel like you're playing a Hollywood action movie. Not to mention the awesome amount of replayability, with new suit unlocks that are naturally integrated into the game world on New Game Plus, which is more than I could ever ask for in a video game. Each of the higher difficulties mix things up with encounters, and the hardcore setting only allows 3 saves per playthrough. Big Resident Evil speedrunner energy on that mode. So that's Dead Space 2's gameplay in a nutshell. We're going to talk about this title's amazing story now. So if you haven't played Dead Space 2 and don't want to be spoiled, please skip to the time on screen. If you don't care about spoilers, well, enjoy the ride. Before we continue Isaac's journey into the Sprawl, I've got to fill you all in on the glorious religion of Unitology. At the end of Dead Space 1, we find out through the betrayal of our comrade, Kendra Daniels, that she was working for a government agency in the hopes to cover up the unearthing of the man-made red marker. This marker was not an ancient artifact in the way we understand. Instead, this thing was created in the exact image and code of an actual alien relic found and buried on Earth, that being the black marker. The red marker was buried on Aegis 7, far away from any human contact as to not trigger its horrifying effects. How would humanity know about these effects, I hear you asking? In this twist-filled reveal, Kendra mentions the uncovering of the black marker, an event that occurred over 300 years prior. Before planet cracking, before extensive space travel, a man named Michael Altman, a brilliant scientist of his time, uncovered this original black marker with his research team in the Gulf of Mexico. During their research, Altman's team found that this black marker was basically a limitless source of energy, its cosmic power aiding in the advancement of technology, and also the beginning of wild, mind-altering changes on the human psyche. As we've seen in our own fright-filled adventures, Altman's team began to lose it. Seeing how this marker was causing unfathomable terror, Altman ordered the full destruction of his lab, marker and all. This disaster ended up going public. After this, Altman would be killed by some of his colleagues, who oversaw the artifact's original extraction, and who also happened to be touched by its influence. As the years went on, Altman's death was twisted into a tale of martyrdom, a man killed by the government for wanting to spread the good word of unitology. Books branded with his name and other forms of propaganda would be released into the galaxy, creating this mysterious religion centered around convergence theory, the idea of one mind, body, and soul under the loving embrace of the marker. Altman's search for scientific innovation would end up creating a beast he was actively fighting against, which is horrifying and very real. I told you all of that so that I can let you know Titan Station has a massive unitologist population. A lot of true believers live here on the Sprawl. That's right, we're in for one hell of a night. Getting back to our main man Isaac, you can probably guess he isn't the biggest fan of unitology or its followers. You know, being possessed by a marker and having his entire life ruined. Gunnar Wright brings such realistic humanity to this once silent protagonist. His performance all throughout feels authentic. We get a broad sweep of emotion out of this guy, from fear outright confusion with a plethora of hallucinations, spurts of levity, and of course, tons of badass moments.
This is a really bad idea.
Well, stick around. I'm full of bad ideas.
You can really tell in the moments of mental lapse, Isaac struggles keeping it together.
Dead, Isaac? Did you think I would forgive you?
Get out of my head. You're not Nicole!
As soon as his friends show up, he's back to hiding his pain. Sometimes that pain coming out in frustrated anger.
He's staring at me, Isaac.
Through the holes in his head.
Listen to me.
Stop staring at me! Stop it! Relax!
Isaac, we have to get out of here.
He's just so real, it's too good. One of the first big twists Isaac encounters is his guide, Dana, the woman who promised him a cure for his mind goblins, turns out to be a unitologist. Dana and her cronies want Isaac back in captivity. It turns out, during his 3-year mental hospital stay, EarthGov and Director Tideman actually forced Isaac to create a brand new marker using the latent signal trapped in his brain. Tideman, being a believer in innovation and wanting humanity to stop having to rely on planet cracking to survive, had Isaac create this new marker in the hopes to salvage whatever powerful energy they'd be able to harvest from it. A literal repeating of history that caused the necromorph horror in the first place. This didn't go unnoticed by some devout unitologists like Dana here. Dana's plan was to capture Isaac, again forcing him to make more markers to spread throughout the rest of the galaxy. Before that can happen, an EarthGov gunship kills Dana and her crew as Isaac escapes in the crossfire. It's actually kind of insane how persistently torturous unitology's been for this poor guy. There's a small but significant detail to Isaac's backstory that enhances his character even further. Isaac's mother was actually a unitologist, selling off all of her belongings to devote her life to the church. This made for a pretty rough upbringing for Isaac, in turn leaving him with nothing but hate for this organization. Losing his mother, girlfriend, and control over his own mind to this religion is just so sad. Isaac is genuinely broken. The best part about all of this is that you really see that come out in Dead Space 2's story and his characterization. Unitology was mentioned in the first game through text files and Chalice Mercer's ramblings, but you may have missed it in the overwhelming chaos. The one downside to Isaac in Dead Space 1 is that all of his characterization is so phenomenal in the second game that it kinda makes you wish he did speak up about unitology in the first title. But that's the thing, DS2 does so much effortless carrying for both games' lore and backstory in such natural ways that it doesn't really stand out as a clear negative until you're hours deep in the second game. At the end of the first game, Nicole appears to Isaac as this demonic ghoul and stays that way for 90% of this story, tormenting this poor dude and constantly reminding him of how he couldn't save her. Despite it literally being impossible, Isaac's journey is one about grief and how to conquer it. It's funny thinking about when this game came out, I still wasn't totally sold on Isaac speaking. Being a stubborn, hardcore fan of that first game, I really enjoyed Isaac being a silent protagonist. The moment that won me over was his epic second spaceflight sequence. During one of the larger puzzles in the middle of the game, Isaac has to fix a solar array in part of the Sprawl miles away from his friends. After fixing said array, Isaac gets a frantic call from one of his fellow survivors. A massive group of Necros is about to catch up with his pals. He absolutely has no time to realistically get over to them. Isaac, being the selfless badass that he is, uses a rocket ejection system to fling himself over to his distressed friends.
Isaac,
We have to cross to the government sector before they cut us off. You'll never make it down here in time.
I'll be there!
Instability detected in new realignments. Emergency ejector systems initializing.
Hearing Isaac scream, "I'll be there," before he soars across an entire space station in complete silence, his heavy breathing upping the tension as he near misses through destroyed buildings, the music welling back up as he re-enters the station's atmosphere just to reach his allies with a badass Superman landing is the kinda heroic shit that makes me genuinely tear up. This was the moment where everything changed for me. I fell in love with Isaac as a character. Again, Gunnar Wright just does the damn thing. His reading of the lines, even during the puzzle, conveys such worry for his friends.
You alright?
We just made it to the crossover tube when the beam hit. Isaac, those things are still heading towards the transport hub. They're wrecking everything in their path.
Holy shit, they'll cut us off. Get to the hub. I'll meet you as soon as I can.
The only other survivors he can trust amongst a sea of monsters and brainwashed cultists. You get another Nicole hallucination mocking him before the space jump. He actually proves the hallucination wrong, proves his grief wrong. It's one of those things where if you're reading the Nicole ghost for what it is, Isaac's sorrow of not being able to save the love of his life, and his guilt of encouraging her to join the Ishimura, both literal and possible things for him to have seen coming, it hits you right in the heart when you not only see him, but control him doing something impossible, flying across the sprawl, making it just in the nick of time to save his friends. It's fucking masterfully done. Isaac Clarke gets his moments, his progression, and a full character arc by the time credits roll. It's wild how much work was put into this narrative to make this icon shine as bright as he does. It's one of, if not the best video game set pieces of all time. It's fun to experience and enriches this iconic character. I haven't really explored Ghost and Nicole yet. She is undoubtedly a big part of Isaac's progression out of his madness. But for now, let's move on to some of the new cast. As Isaac explores the sprawl, his main goal is to track down Nolan Strauss and get to the city's government sector, where together they can hopefully destroy Tideman's new marker. Trekking deeper into the sprawl, we find another survivor.
Whoa, hey!
No. You stay back. You want to talk? You talk from there.
Don't say you're gonna help. The last person who said that tried to kill me.
Hey, take it easy. I'm not gonna hurt you.
Yeah, you got that right. You try it, and you're dead.
A badass babe named Ellie Langford. Ellie was a CEC pilot before shit hit the fan. She, like Isaac, is also very well written, played by Sonita Henry. Ellie thankfully isn't a damsel in distress, with her capabilities of holding her own on multiple occasions throughout the game. She isn't perfect by any means, and slips up from time to time, however. Notably in her first interaction with Isaac, she's pretty shaken up after holding off a horde of necromorphs all by herself with a single plasma cutter. That should go to show you what the best weapon in the game is, by the way. Understandably, not knowing if she can trust our leading man, but giving him a chance at escape by letting him progress further into the station. Eventually, Ellie runs into Strauss, and after some explaining, Isaac convinces her to look after and protect the madman. Ellie and Isaac have mad chemistry, and the moments of levity I mentioned earlier mostly come out of their interactions.
Wait, you're CEC?
Heavy equipment pilot, class 4. You?
Engineer.
Nerd.
Whoa. Whoa. Whoa, stop!
Looks like we reached the foundation pylons of the government sector.
So how do we get in there?
Straight ahead. We do have a giant drill.
You know, I'm right on top of this thing, right?
Ellie! Ellie! Help!
Wait a minute, so Isaac Clarke is a lovable white guy default protagonist man with a cool dark-haired, blue-eyed, red shirt-wearing girl that has a cute accent that he does witty banter with? Is Dead Space 2 actually horror Uncharted 2? I mean, the game does have amazing set pieces. I think I'm seeing a pattern here. It is really refreshing how Isaac and Ellie's relationship isn't purely based on romance. There is definitely some tension in that department, but the story is about Isaac defeating his inner demons while trying to do what he couldn't in Game 1, protect those around him. Isaac's other pal, Nolan Strauss, is a researcher who went insane during an assignment where he had to collect and study a fragment of the red marker from Game 1. Strauss and Isaac, being the only people still alive who've come into contact with the red marker, have these blueprint signals buried in their minds. Tideman wants both of these guys dead, so Strauss and Isaac have a common goal, just at different sanity levels. While Isaac is rather composed on his journey, Strauss constantly goes off the deep end, spouting about steps he has to follow to learn the truth. He also sees hallucinations of his child that he argues with and follows blindly. Ultimately, Strauss does end up losing his mind and manages to stab one of Ellie's eyes out.
There you are, Isaac. We've been waiting for you. Now it's your turn!
Wait, whose eye is that? Ellie has blue eyes. Uh-oh. Strauss tries the same thing on Isaac, and while our lead doesn't want to do it, he has to tragically take out this lost soul, leaving Isaac alone to stop Tideman and his marker. Along with Isaac's journey, there are two other stories happening at the same time. In Dead Space Mobile, you play as another character, codenamed Vandal. Vandal is on a mission from the Unitology Church. They unknowingly release a horde of necromorphs into Titan Station. Tideman gets a report of this and tracks the station tampering to Vandal's suit. They then have to work for Tideman to clear their name. At the end of Vandal's quest, they destroy a hive mind-like monster. Thinking this would stop the necromorph threat, Vandal is dragged down into a pit where they seemingly die.
Director Tideman, this is Vandal. It's done. I stabilized the reactor. But I'm hurt. Pretty bad. Director?
Can you believe Dead Space in the year 2010 successfully pulled off a Samus? Like, that's so cool. A female Dead Space protagonist, who would have saw that coming? Vandal's real name is Carrie Norton, and you can find audio logs from her in Dead Space 2.
Audio log rate number 438642. These could be my last words. The monsters are loose. I couldn't stop them. And now the reactor core is overheating, which will destroy the entire sprawl if I can't fix it. So I hope someone hears this. It means I did that much right.
Carrie is believed to be dead at the end of her story, despite us not seeing her fate. Tideman leaves her hanging after killing the new hive mind, but that's the last we ever see of her, unfortunately. In Dead Space Severed, the story expansion to DS2, we play as Dead Space Extraction's Gabe Weller. Weller was the coolest character from Extraction, so I was excited to see him again in Xbox 360 vision.
Sounds like your rookie's losing it.
Yeah, reckon whatever's gone to everyone else down here is getting to him too.
Shouldn't you take his firearm?
If he cracks, I'll deal with it. The day I can't put down a rookie is the day I hang up my boots.
In Severed, you have to rescue your wife, another character from Extraction named Lexine Weller. Gabe is working for Titan Security and is attacked by Necros while patrolling the mines of the station. You're basically seeing the aftermath of Isaac's exploits through familiar areas of the main game. It's like you're just missing him. Gabe's goal is to find his wife and escape, but obviously that's easier said than done. Necromorphs block your path, including the Twitcher from Game 1, making its shaky return. Gabe's comrade, Victor, also has orders from Tideman to take him out. Gabe's wife, Lexine, has also been monitored by Tideman, putting her in something called the Oracle Program, which was an initiative in monitoring Lexine in seeing if her soon-to-be-born child would be affected by the marker's influence. Since Lexine was also a survivor of the Aegis 7 incident and escaped fairly unscathed, seeing if her child got whatever marker immunity she seems to have would be very important. Gabe's story ends on a sad but hopeful note. He dies getting his wife to a shuttle where he holds off a horde with his legs missing, by the way. Weller's a badass, and I think one day we're gonna have to talk about Dead Space Extraction in full so you can learn more about him. I wanted to put a spotlight on DS2's side stories because it really goes to show how hard Visceral Games went for this series. You can tell the people making Dead Space loved it and wanted to tell really cool intertwining stories that enriched each other. It's one thing to get an RE4 separate ways type story, but Dead Space had like 3 and they were all fun. Before we tackle the epic conclusion to DS2, we've got to talk about the highlight of this game, Isaac's return to the decommissioned USG Ishimura. As Isaac, Ellie, and Strauss approach Gov Sector, Tideman orders the destruction of the tram our trio are using. The tram makes it through, but the track it's connected to is destroyed. Isaac sees an opportunity to use the Ishimura's tractor beam tethers to realign the tram's rails. This level is, as you'd imagine, amazing. You get to see most of the starting levels in this new decommissioned state. Repairing the tractor beam and fighting the new necromorphs in these old environments is so cool. Much of the ship is covered in construction tape and materials, but a lot of the decommission cleanup was still underway before the Sprawl outbreak. Blue lights reveal all of the massacring that took place 3 years prior. You can tell this trip down memory lane won't be easy for our main man. Which, speaking of that, another amazing subtlety is Isaac being stressed out about having to return to this accursed ship. At one point, Ellie even catches his voice shaking a bit and asks if he's gonna be alright. Of course, the Nicole demon torments him all the way through this level, even appearing to him recounting her full death message from Dead Space 1. Something I really like about this updated scene is that since Nicole is played by a new actress in Dead Space 2, Tanya Clark, the message reads as a more sinister reimagining that's playing out in Isaac's mind. Tanya Clark handles the material very differently to how Nicole's original actress did, coming off a bit more dour in her delivery. It makes me think this was intentional since this ghost isn't the same innocent woman from that first game. She's a mental manifestation of Isaac's guilt who happens to be twisting the knife. It gets even more interesting when you realize you don't have to stay in this room and watch the message play out. You can choose to ignore this part of Isaac's pain. There isn't a huge boss fight or even that many necromorph appearances on the Ishimura this time. It feels more like a traumatic and extremely atmospheric walk down memory lane. Before you ask, yes, Isaac still hears voices in that one bathroom. Okay, everyone, it's time to talk about the amazing finale of Dead Space 2. After Isaac kills Strauss, Nicole jumps us, almost begging Isaac to tell her why he keeps holding on to her memory. She was his everything, his light that kept him going. Meeting back up with Ellie in the mines of Titan, the two power up a giant excavator drill. Together they drill their way into the government sector. This set piece is literally just the scene from RE4 where Ashley drives the massive Tonka truck while Leon shoots at the pursuing Ganados. It's pretty sick getting the Dead Space 2 overhaul mod of that scenario. Finally reaching GovSec, Ellie gets her and Isaac's escape plan, a gunship powered up and running. Isaac, not wanting to take any chances, sends Ellie off remotely.
Closing hatch.
Oh. Hey, Isaac, what are you doing?
Gunship commando.
Isaac, what are you doing? Open the door right now.
Emergency launch cycle initiated.
No.
Airlock sealed.
No, don't you dare! Don't you dare launch the ship! Isaac!
It's your best chance, Ellie. You got life support, comms. Hey, you gotta be rescued.
You bastard.
I need you to be rescued. I couldn't save Nicole, but I can save you, Ellie. So, bye.
If you ask me, I think he did the right thing here. Even though Isaac's focus is as clear as day, the Nicole guilt still lingers, and losing another innocent on his conquest for clarity would only make things worse. Getting deeper into the building, Tideman warns Clark that he's got 200 armed men waiting for him inside, and he isn't lying. Isaac manages to break away, sabotaging security, letting in a massive horde of monsters. The first time I played this game, I remember being kinda put off by this. Isaac is killing bad people, yes, but they're still people. They're not twisted flesh monsters. I don't know, it's a little haunting. Nicole then appears to us, asking Isaac where he's going. He responds with a simple, "I don't know." She then uses the waypoint button to show us the path forward. Having this scene happen right after seeing Isaac intentionally slaughter hundreds of men gave me this odd feeling like, yeah, what are we doing here? Where are we going with this story? Having that clear video game language presented to Isaac and the player to get both of us back on track after clearly losing it feels so uncanny to me. What happens next is something I can never predict. We find the marker Isaac was forced to build, and yeah, it's massive. At the foot of the monument, thousands of necromorphs can be seen. This is actually what convergence is, sending out a signal that makes humans want to gather around the marker in this mindless trance. I'm sure isn't exactly what your common unitologist was expecting from their almighty belief system. Why the markers do this, at all, is a story for another time. In a nearby room, Isaac finds a machine specifically made for him. Entering it, we hear Nicole recite all of the steps Strauss had been repeating. If you've never played any Dead Space games, you've definitely heard about this scene. It's one of the scariest things that you have to do to a video game character.
Step 1, crawl inside. Step 2, the screws go tight, all around. Cross my heart and hope to die. Stick a needle in your eye.
The needle through Isaac's eye hits the part of his brain that has that marker blueprint locked away. Now that it's unlocked, we know exactly how to destroy the marker. Nicole, now appearing as a blinding light, urges us to follow. Interesting how Isaac called her his light. It's almost like she's using that now in this situation. As this happens, a new necromorph shows up. This thing is very similar to the unkillable pursuer slasher from DS1. The next gauntlet of rooms leading to the marker are an endurance test for your survival horror run and gun expertise. It's a challenging sprint to the finish line with hordes of monsters that increase as the rooms go on. Getting past the overwhelming resistance, we make it to the foot of the artifact. Tideman greets us with a javelin through the hand. His body, half burnt off, fires at Isaac, spearing him multiple times, but nothing will stop us from freeing our mind from this nightmare. Nicole materializes again in a familiar visual.
Thank you, Isaac. Now, time to die.
What?
Yours is the last body we need to be reborn. The Makers must be absorbed.
The Makers? You mean me? But Strauss said we could destroy the marker!
Not if we can shoot you first!
God damn it, I trusted you! Fuck you! And fuck your marker!
I gotta say, fuck you and fuck your marker is up there with you want stars for me. I just love the idea of telling an ancient eldritch alien artifact to go fuck itself. This thing has been using Isaac's insecurities and wearing his dead girlfriend as a mask to execute on some divine plan, literally killing thousands of people in the process. Fuck this thing. Surviving waves of literal mind goblins, Isaac destroys the heart of the marker, snapping him out of this trance. As Isaac lays up against the destroyed artifact, he silently reflects on things, accepting his fate. The Sprawl doesn't have much time left before it self-destructs. Isaac is free now. No more hallucinations, no more pain, no more worrying about Nicole. He can rest now. Every main character in this series dies in one way or another. Zach Hammond, Kendra Daniels, Chalice Mercer, Terrence Kine, Franco Delisle, Dana Le Guin, Nolan Strauss, Gabe Weller, Carrie Norton, Hans Tideman, Ellie...
You complete bastard! Was this your great plan? Dump me off and die? Heads up!
The final fight sequence is Isaac escaping with a new lease on life. We're not dying today. Fuck unitology and fuck this station. Saved by his beautiful guardian angel, Ellie motherfucking Langford. The two escape just in time before the Sprawl explodes. Drained from his insane journey, Isaac happily rests, but something feels off.
What?
Whew. I can talk about Dead Space 2 all day, but if I had to say anything more about this phenomenal game, it'd be a giant thank you to everyone who helped bring this fantastic action horror game to life. A lot was riding on this sequel, and Visceral Games went above and beyond to deliver on a classic adventure that I'm still thinking about to this day. My favorite video game genre is survival horror. Dead Space 2 sacrificing those classic gameplay mechanics to tell a story about mental illness, facing your inner demons, and overcoming impossible odds is actually really inspiring to me. While it definitely isn't a survival horror game, it sure as hell has the heart of one. Dead Space 2 is horrifying. It's fun. It's a thrill a minute. But most importantly, Dead Space 2 is fearless. You know, it's really odd how perfect a duology Dead Space is. They said all they needed to with 2 games and a bunch of awesome spin-offs. Shame they never made a third one. I'm gonna need some backup.